We know divorce is rarely what anyone hopes for, and for many, it's the hardest season they never planned to face. But what if the most expensive part of a divorce isn't the lawyer? It's the emotion driving your decisions. Today, we're talking with a mediator who's seen behind the scenes of high conflict divorces and shares what actually helps families move forward with clarity instead of chaos. Have you ever felt something was wrong but couldn't explain it? Like the person you love was slowly chipping away at your sense of self?
We've been there. Different marriages, but to the same man, with the same toxic pattern. But God was still working.
We're Lizzie and Deana, women of faith, survivors, and truth tellers.
Surviving toxic relationships is for any woman stuck in confusion, healing after betrayal, or searching for her voice again.
You are not crazy.
You are deeply loved. Hey everybody, welcome today to Surviving Toxic Relationships, and we are so excited to have with us Elizabeth Merrill. Liz is a divorce mediator and communication strategist who helps people navigate conflict with clarity and reason. As the founder of Open Space Mediation, she's helped hundreds of couples save time, money, and sanity by handling divorce smarter, not louder. She brings practical tools for better communication, conflict resolution, and emotional regulation. Skills anyone can use to make tough conversations easier and more effective. So welcome today, Liz. We're so excited to have you, and I can't wait to hear your story and what you went through personally and how it got you to where you are today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to meet you guys.
You too. Absolutely.
Well, my story probably parallels so many other women's stories. And I work with a lot of other women who have been in this situation or who are in this situation. And it's kind of comical because I have gotten to the point where I can almost predict what people are going to say. And it's funny because a lot of these abusers think that they're very original, but they just all seem to work from the same playbook. And that was my situation. I met this man when I was in my mid-20s, and he was older than me, about 9 years older, British, had this beautiful accent, had a PhD, brilliant, super charming. And I was like, oh my God, look at this guy. He's got benefits. He's super smart. And he thinks that I walk on water. He thinks I'm amazing. And it was, I had been dating, stoners and musicians because I was going to the Conservatory of Music in San Francisco. And this guy was totally like in a different walk of life. And I was like, this guy, I can't believe this guy likes me. He was wining me and dining me and bringing me flowers and that whole kind of scenario. And there was a little voice in the back of my head that was like, okay, this is a little weird, but it's fine. It's fine. He loves me. And I am pretty awesome. And he sees that in me. And that's so intoxicating, right? And at first I didn't realize he was married. And then it kind of gradually became clear that he was. And he was like, but we're not really together. And then it became clear that they weren't divorced, but it was fine because they just weren't really together. And I would just like lapped up all of his stories. And then, like very short order, he brought his kids over to meet me. And even though I wasn't a parent at that time, this voice in the back of my head was like, I don't know that I should be meeting his kids this early, but it's fine. I'm sure this is fine. And then he proposed to me like really quickly. And again, the little voice in the back of my head was like, this is really fast, but he's taking me out to really fancy meals and he thinks I'm cake. This is awesome. It's going to be fine. And, the mask started slipping and he, I remember the first time he started acting unhinged and I was like, what, where did this come from? Oh, but then, he's really sorry. It's fine. You know what I mean? And I didn't have anything to contextualize this behavior. And I just kept, apologizing for him in my mind and sweeping it under the rug. And before I know it, we were married. And he's like, you don't need your friends here anymore. Let's move out of the country. And I was like, that sounds so glamorous. So we moved out of the country. away from my family and away from my friends, and the behavior escalated and it got weirder and I was really isolated, and I just became more and more entrenched. And I think, again, like looking back, I see that these are like classic patterns of abuse, classic behavior patterns of someone with NPD, codependency, behavior patterns, and denial. And I didn't have any of that terminology. This was a really long time ago, almost before the internet. So there, like, I couldn't Google like what the hell was going on. I didn't have any, like, none of my family had any familiarity with this, because unlike a lot of people, I mean, this is not like, this wasn't something that was familiar to me. I have, dysfunction in my family, but it wasn't that. So I just didn't have any context. And I started thinking it was me. And then finally, I got pregnant after having some problems there. And then I was like, I have to stay here and make it work. I'll just try harder. I'll just be a better wife. I'll be a better mom. It's clearly my fault, and you get in these cycles, and your brain gets trained, right? You build these communication patterns and these conflict patterns and these feelings about yourself, right? It's me. And I think also as women, we're socialized to think that it's us, right? And we should be able to fix things, and it's our job to make it work. And I certainly felt that way. 20 years of this, hiding my children, from him, leaving the house with them and staying in a hotel and being afraid of trying to reconnect with him to tell him what was happening, because I didn't know what would happen when I did. When I was pregnant with my third daughter, I remember he threw a chair at me. And, I kept waiting for something so extreme to happen that other people would see it. You know what I mean? Because the emotional stuff was so intense and people didn't see it. And when I tried to describe it to them, they were like, well, why don't you just leave? What's the problem? It's kind of on you. And I thought that it was, you know what I mean? And I didn't have the language to say, like, I can't. I don't know why, but I just can't. And even when we went to couples therapy, I would have couples therapists who didn't seem to get it, right? Or I would go to my own therapists and they didn't seem to get it. And I just felt like I just wasn't trying hard enough. And finally, my children, and they were, I think that by that point, they were all in middle school. They all came to me and they were like, Mom, why don't you leave? Can you get divorced so we can leave? And I was like, whoa, it was like this gut punch, because all this time I was like, I'm being strong. I'm staying because of the kids. I'm going to show them how to be a strong person. I'm brave. And I was like, I'm not brave. I am not brave. I'm not brave. And I went down to the courthouse and I said, give me the papers, show me how to, I'm just going to do it. And that was it. And we were off to the races. And it was a horrible poop show. And it was as bad as I thought it would be. So that experience, as bad as it was, turned out to be a very informative experience, because it formed the basis of what happened after that. Because what I ended up doing was change post-divorce, changing my career, just kind of changing everything. I went from being a professional classical musician to starting my own business as a mediator. We had a mediator during the divorce, and my attorney was like, she's the best mediator in town. She's gonna, and I was like, well, that sounds awesome. I was really stressed out because it was the most expensive block of hours I could have ever imagined. I had to take out a huge loan to pay for this whole thing. And she sucked. Do you know what I mean? She was an attorney mediator, and she did nothing to help us come together, to become better co-parents, to resolve our conflict. You know what I mean? It was just like a formality. It was like performative. It was a show. It was for the attorneys. Nothing got resolved. Nobody was helping us. My emotions were so over the top, and I'm generally not an emotional person, but I could barely think. And we had blocked out a whole day of this, and I'm like, what in the world kind of system is this? Who thinks that people can make logical decisions in this kind of pressure cooker environment? If this is the best mediator in town, I don't know squat about mediation, but I know that I could do better than that. And after, the divorce was finalized, and after we settled, and after I, got myself organized and got my children organized, I started pursuing the training I needed in mediation. And then I started taking classes on to be a business owner. And I, started taking classes in digital marketing, and I started taking free workshops at our local small business development center. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And I had no idea how hard it was going to be. And I don't know if I would have done it if I'd known how hard it was going to be, but I did. And that was years and years ago. And now looking back, I'm so glad I did, because there are so many people who are in the situation that I was in. Do you know what I mean? They don't know what the heck is going on. They're scared, they're lonely, they feel isolated. And all of the messaging that you get when you are thinking about a divorce from friends, families, Facebook groups, your spouse, TV shows, movies, is all geared towards escalating your feelings even more, right? And driving you to make decisions when you're scared and angry and distrustful and freaked out. And that is not when you need to be making life decisions about your future and your finances and your children. And getting dragged into knockdown, drag out litigation is not always where you need to be. Even if you are divorcing someone who's high conflict, sometimes you have to have that, but not always. And what I've discovered is sometimes somebody really just needs somebody to listen to them and hear them and help them calm down and help them understand what their options are, and even just understand a little bit about what the laws are in your state, so that you can understand the difference between an actual threat and just bogus BS on trying to control you. I'm going to take your kids from you. Like in Colorado, that's so unlikely. Do you know what I mean? But if you don't know that, it's extremely scary. If you think your kids are going to be taken away from you and you don't know any better, you're not going to risk that.
Especially if they're telling you that to fearmonger you, and so many of these narcissists do that. They'll tell you, if you don't just go ahead and give me what I want, or if you don't cooperate, I'm going to tell them about the time you yelled at the kids, or I'm going to tell them about the time, whatever, threw something around across the living room, and I'm going to tell them how crazy you are. And they do these things to terrify you. And of course, you're right. If you don't know anything about the law and you're just going to this terrifying situation where you feel so vulnerable and you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know if they're going to leave you dead broke or any of those things. Yeah. So good points.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. It's very satisfying work. It's also very exhausting emotionally. I would say that like 95% of the people who call me are women, even though I don't have anything on my website that calls out women in particular. It's statistically more women file for divorce than men. But I remember like when I first started talking to attorneys, and I would go in there and say, there's abuse happening, and they would treat me like I was crazy. You know what I mean? They would treat me like I was making this up, and like they didn't believe me. And I was like, what is happening here? Like why should I have to, this is all ass backwards. And I think that, that kind of speaks to a broader problem we have with domestic violence and abuse. And like attorneys are like make jokes, like all women are divorcing a narcissist and everybody's husband's a narcissist. And it's true that word is overused, but it is also true that it's underreported, because a narcissist is not going to go in and get a diagnosis. You hear this all, oh, does he have a diagnosis? No, he doesn't have a diagnosis because he doesn't have a problem. He's fine. He's perfect.
Yeah.
It's so common. It really is common, and it's on the rise. There is plenty of studies that show it's on the rise, particularly in this country. And just sort of, incidentally, in my tiny little practice, in my tiny little corner of the world, I see more and more examples of it. And, it's hard. It's hard watching
Yeah.
every day, and I have to be really careful not to get jaded.
No, and absolutely. It's definitely hard not to get jaded. We kinda understand that even when you try to say emotionally soft and empathetic. Do you feel like that we see more and more of it because we talk about it more than we used to? I mean, Deena and I probably both understood when you were saying there was n we were alone. There wasn't a lot out there, to get that support or to know what we were dealing with. Half the time we were confused of thinking, "Am I in the twilight zone?" And then you have those good days, you have those good moments, so it just becomes a big cycle. I think we all get a little tired of hearing narcissist, 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 but or is that just a big spotlight that this is just toxic behavior and it's unacceptable in a relationship no matter what the other person went through? Or do you think that we've just raised people that are being more toxic than not?
Well, I mean,
It's hard to tell. It's
it's
hard to
hard.
tell.
It's hard to talk about too, because I mean, I am kind of jaded. I think that, I don't want to dig myself into a hole, but I mean, I see so much entitlement in men's behavior, even like non-toxic men and non-narcissistic men, just sort of across the board, even like the good ones. There's so much entitlement. Um, and women who are coming to me who are like not trying to leave a high conflict, quote unquote, person. They're just sick of it. They're like, I don't want to be your mommy. I'm sick of doing everything. I'm sick of, being the second class citizen in the home. I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. Our kids are grown and I'm just not down for it anymore. I can live on my own. I have my own money. Assets are our assets. They're not yours. This is an equitable state. Half of our, retirement is mine. Half of this house is mine. And their husbands are so PO'd and they're like not wanting to accept basic math and laws, and these are like not the quote unquote high conflict people. So, it's a sort of a spectrum, but I mean, I think that there are a lot of women who are just getting tired of that on the whole. And I'm seeing, like a range of younger women all the way up to like older women who are retired. But going back to like people who are in relationships with toxic husbands or partners who are isolated. I mean, obviously, that isolation is a part of that abuse, right? So there's that piece of it. There's shame around it, of course, and embarrassment, like not wanting to tell people, especially when you are talking to people who don't understand it. And like you can only hear, why don't you leave him so many times? And if you haven't experienced that, you don't get it. You know what I mean? And you can be empathetic, but you still don't get it. And how many times did you hear, have you tried this? Well, have you just tried saying that? I'm like, yes, I did. I tried that for the first 17 years because I'm a smart, normal person. Of course I tried that. Of course I did. And it didn't work. If it worked, I wouldn't be here in this same position, And I think that we're lucky in a way to have access to, the internet, books, like a lot of research on it now, podcasts like yours, books. There's so much out there. The downside of that is like the overuse of that term. I have to like caution my clients sometimes from spending too much time in some of these Facebook groups that are just like basic trauma dumping, and people who can trigger you, do you know what I mean, rather than helping you kind of move in a healthy direction away from kind of continuing to repeat your story over and over and over and over again without kind of finding ways of moving out of it and rising above it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, if somebody came to you walk us through, like, we come to you for help because I assume most people that come to you for help are getting to the end and they realize that this is potentially going to be rough now that they've put their foot down and said they're leaving. That's generally when all the masks come off and the real person that you married is standing there looking at you. So what do you do? What's your role here? How do you help people get through these situations, like step by step?
Yeah, it really varies because sometimes people come to me and they're not ready, and we'll just have a conversation. And, they might have questions like, how does divorce work in Colorado, which is where I live? And they just want basic information, like, what are the laws? What does equitable state mean? What does no fault mean? Can you really take my children from me? If he made all the money, have to house mine, those kinds of questions. And then I don't hear from them ever again. Or sometimes I do hear from them like a year later. Sometimes it's just like such a slow process because you guys know, you're like, I'm ready. I'm not ready. I'm ready. No, I'm too scared. Or now it's getting better, or we're going to go work on it. Or, or he's convinced me that things are going to be different this time. Sometimes people are like, I'm ready right now. And they're right, kind of like right at the edge of the precipice. And they really want to jump, but they don't know how to say it. They're afraid to say it. And one of the first things you have to get out of the way is like, how safe are you? Because obviously, like, when somebody's leaving an abusive partner, that's the most dangerous time, and you have to really be careful and make sure that they have their proverbial ducks in a row. They have a safety plan, right? They have access to support, that above and beyond what I provide, because I'm not that kind of professional, but I make sure that, that they have that and they're ready for it, and that they've thought through how and when and where they're going to have that conversation. Sometimes they want me to have that conversation with their spouse, and I can't, it's not really my place to do that, but I'll have that with them. You know what I mean? Once they've had it, I'll say, you can send them to me. I am very happy to have a conversation with them, because sometimes they need to hear certain things from someone else. Like, no, you're not going to take the children, or no, you're not taking everything. That's not the way the law works. That's not the way math works. Do you know what I mean? Or sure, you can hire an attorney, or you're welcome to spend $100,000 in attorney fees, and the outcome is not going to be substantially different than if you mediate, because math is math and law is law. The outcome is still not going to mean you're going to have everything you want, just because you pay an attorney $50,000. What's interesting is very often these high conflict men don't want to hire an attorney. And it's often a combination of, they know more than the attorney does, right? And they just don't want to give that kind of money to an attorney, and or they think that they're going to somehow be able to bamboozle me, right? Because I'm a woman, and they're used to like charming people, and that doesn't work with me. And I've had several instances where they realize they can't anymore put their anger on their soon to be ex, and they put it on me, and thank God, usually most of my sessions are on Zoom and I can just say goodbye. But that's kind of scary. I don't really like that, but it's surprising how effective mediation can be in certain high conflict divorce cases, because once you start down that pathway, usually reason at some point kicks in, right? You realize, well, I guess math is math and law is law, and this is as good a deal as I'm going to get. Threats can only carry you so far.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I could see how mediation would be so impactful, and definitely save some of that money to go elsewhere.
Mhm.
And then we know there's some
Next
people they would rather
lawyer you know.
pay. Yeah, they would rather pay the lawyers just to make sure that their spouse doesn't get it.
There
So,
those
yeah,
people are not interested in mediation for sure. Yeah.
exactly, and it's just that's where selfishness comes in.
Mhm.
So, Go
So
ahead.
I assume that both parties would have to be willing to come and meet with you and sit down and go over what mediation looks like and what it will present and the pros and cons and everything else. So you probably have to get both in agreement to this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously it's not for everybody. And I've gotten more discerning the more I do
Mhm.
this, and have gotten to the point where I will turn people away if I
Yeah.
it's because it's just like exasperating and frustrating to work with people who are like playing silly buggers, as my ex used to call it, who are like not disclosing information and
Mhm.
fiddly farting around and, pretending that X, Y, or Z.
Wasting your time, basically wasting your time, wasting their time, not really interested. And for the people that do take this route, I think it's just fantastic that not only could they save a lot of money, and a lot of time, because sometimes these things drag on for years.
Yeah,
So get in there, mediate some things, and hopefully some give and take will happen. But I like the way that you said you bring in the law and just say, look, you can hire somebody, but this lawyer can't just usurp the law because
yeah,
you want this way.
Yeah.
They still have to go along with the law, and child support is a math, and alimony is a math, and
math.
splitting the marital assets and the home and, retirement and 401k is all basically subject to the law. So what a great thing. I think that's just a wonderful thing that people could consider doing if you could get both on board to do that. I love that
Yeah,
you're doing that.
I try to, like, I tell clients, like, I try to make it very boring.
Yeah.
I mean, emotions always play a part in any kind of divorce, whether it's high conflict or not. But if you can recognize them and acknowledge them and move through them and stay in the boring part of, this plus this equals that, and we're going to put this money in the calculator and, add it up and minus this, that, you're working in this part of your brain, which makes it a lot harder to be working from your amygdala, you
Yeah.
know?
Well,
So,
yeah. And they're going to spend all that money on a lawyer anyway. So
mhm.
if they spend $100,000 on a lawyer, instead of just, splitting that money with you, it's probably going to come out in the wash. So good
Well,
stuff.
I just want to plug a thing that I did recently because I'm so proud of myself because I'm not a coder. But it's like such a huge part of a divorce, right? Is how much does a divorce cost? And obviously, emotion makes your divorce a lot more expensive. So I used AI and I created a divorce cost calculator. So you can play around with it and see very quickly how quickly the cost of a divorce can escalate if you have two attorneys. And, if your attorneys are going to kind of escalate a custody battle, you can add in the cost of a PRE or a CFI, or if you have to have a business valuated, or you need a forensic accountant in there, and it kind of like has a rolling tab at the top so that you can see how quickly that adds up, because I think a lot of people don't really understand. And of course, when your emotions are escalated, it's so easy to just pop that off, and you're like, I don't even care, just take all the money that I have, just please make this pain go away. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think is important, is education.
Oh, education is very impactful. It's just kind of sad that some of us didn't have that education or knowledge before we even dated or got married to this person, or we wouldn't have this huge financial cost.
Yeah.
And I think we don't learn boundaries until we've walked through some of that stuff,
Mm-mm.
truthfully. But I 100% agree. Divorce is more emotion. And, I've seen also a lot of divorced couples later on become friends and go, boy, we weren't smart spending all that money on those lawyer fees. And like you said, the forensic accountant and things like that. It adds up to the point where both are destitute at the end.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And sometimes you have to have that, right? And certainly, like, if you are trying to leave a super toxic abusive, horrible person, you need an attorney, and I would never tell somebody you don't need an attorney if I thought they really needed one, but you don't always need one. And I think it's important to understand the difference, or at least to be able to ask the right questions and sort of know your options ahead of time, and to be able to gather information and analyze it from a regulated standpoint.
Yeah.
So that you're making wise decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. Well, that's perfect. That's a perfect place to end there, Liz. And thank you so much for what you do. I know this has got to be a really tough job. I can't even imagine, but I'm sure it also has some very rewarding points too. When you can come in and be an advocate and help somebody get out of potentially years of high conflict divorce battles, and that just exhaust people, and, use resources that really should go to the kids, or to the other spouse. So thanks for what you do. Appreciate it so much. And if you want to quickly just tell us where we can find you, we'll also put a link for your materials in the description of the podcast episode and in YouTube. But meanwhile, just tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Open Space Mediation is my website, and all the stuff is on there. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Thank
all right.
Appreciate it.
Inviting me to be on your podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It was so good, and such great information. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you, Liz. We hope you have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
If today's conversation encouraged you, share this episode with someone who may need clarity during a difficult season. You can learn more about Elizabeth Merrill and her work at Open Space Mediation. We will include all links in the description below. And if you're walking through healing or learning to recognize healthier relationships, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected with us here on Surviving Toxic Relationships. And remember, you are not alone, and you are not crazy, and peace is possible.